Okay, so the power of AI, reducing inequalities in MUN. So before moving on to the actual content, I would first like to introduce basically who I am. So my name is Sean Kim, and I'm a student from Seoul, South Korea. I love MUN, and I've been to more than 40 MUN conferences. Also, I'm very interested in international relations and politics, and I'm also very interested in philosophy. In my downtime, I love reading books, and one of the most recent books I've written is by Max Weber called Politics as a Vocation. And also, now this wants to lessen inequality, SDG 10. This is going to be the main focus and the main impetus as to why I created this presentation and why I created this initiative. So the table of contents is, so first I'm going to do a brief introduction about MUN, the impacts of MUN, problems with MUN, introduction to artificial intelligence, then RNN and LSTM, explanation of program, and current limitations and solutions. So before moving on to the first section, I would first like to describe in brief some of the terms and abbreviations that I might use within this presentation so as to get everyone to be familiar with them. So I've divided this into two categories, MUN-related terms and technical terms. These technical terms refer to terms that I'll be using within the explanation of the technology behind the program that I've created. So first, going on to MUN-related terms, MUN, as many of you might know, stands for Model United Nations. I will explain what this means and what this activity is about later on. Within MUN, there are many types of organizations and there are many rules of procedures, also known as the ROP. These rules of procedure detail how the conference will be dictated and carried out. Some certain examples of this ROP are MUN, UNA USA, and UN for MUN, which respectively all stand for the Hague International Model United Nations, the United Nations Association of the United States of America, and the United Nations for Model United Nations. Now, moving on to certain technical terms. As many of you might know, AI stands for artificial intelligence. In addition to this, I will be talking about three more specific terms that maybe you might not have heard about. The first is RNN, which stands for Recurrent Neural Network. Second is LSTM, which is Long Short-Term Memory, also called Long Short-Term Memory Network. The last is GPT-3, or Generative Pre-trained Transformer 3. Now, this is a technology created by OpenAI, which I will also explain later. All these technical terms will later be explained. So then, what is MUN? So this is an image of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. Now, the reason that this image is here is because, as the name implies, Model United Nations closely models what the United Nations does. MUN is basically an activity where usually students take on the role of delegates simulating the United Nations. And depending on the committee, students can also take NGO roles. And also, thousands, tens of thousands, or possibly even hundreds of thousands of students participate in MUN. Sometimes awards are given to the most competitive students, the most competitive and most well-done students, but it's not always. This is different in MUN and UNA USA procedures, whereby oftentimes in MUN conferences with MUN rules of procedures, awards are not given, but for conferences that follow UNA USA procedures, which is more towards the Americas, awards are oftentimes given. You can think that it's much like debate, I guess, but also at the same time, it's very different in that you need to take a very diplomatic stance and that you're representing a country, not a simple stance or a team that you are advocating for. And to explain briefly about the history of UN, Model UN. Model UN began as UN was previously the League of Nations. Model UN also previously began as a Model League of Nations conference. So the first of them were held at Oxford University in 1921, and later on this got passed on to Harvard in 1923. And ever since then, many conferences have taken place, and annually there are hundreds, even thousands of conferences that take place. So talking about some changes over time to MUN, of course, although MUN is a very traditional and very well-known activity, it has not always been this way, and what we do in MUN has changed over time. Notably, recently, many specialized committees such as the Federal Trade Commission and the U.S. National Security Council have appeared. So the Federal Trade Commission is basically an advocates for antitrust and consumer protection in the U.S., and the U.S. National Security Council is a council where discussions are taking place to determine important security measures and defense matters in the United Nations. These aren't organs or committees of the United Nations, but Model United Nations is slowly expanding to committees and conferences and discussions that are outside of the boundaries of the United Nations. Additionally, there are things like joint cabinet crises, where these are multiple interconnected committees where decisions in one committee can affect the decisions or doings of another committee. Now, this is presumably done in order to facilitate a more real MUN experience, a more real UN experience. All of these new things and all of these new conferences and committees add more meaning to MUN. And the more committees and more discussions MUN becomes to represent, although it does have a downside of getting more vague and not fitting into the name of Model United Nations, I personally think it gets better because it provides to delegates and provides to students a more diversified experience. Now, for the phases of an MUN conference, I oftentimes like to divide this into two major phases: the preparation phase or the research phase, and the implementation phase. Although this makes it seem like MUN has two very distinct phases that are completely separate of each other, this division is only done for clarity purposes. The preparation stage heavily affects the implementation stage. Adequate preparation in the preparation stage culminates to a successful implementation stage and debate, bringing the quality up and enabling you to show yourself as a very prospective delegate. So the preparation phase oftentimes differs by ROP, and the preparation phase is what this initiative helps the most. So this differs by ROP, and you do things like researching about the topic, preparing an opening speech, preparing a resolution, preparing position papers, preparing speeches, and sometimes you even prepare amendments beforehand. The second stage is the implementation phase. So this, again, differs by ROP, but oftentimes it consists of you're bringing what you prepared into action by debating with others and coming up with a solution. You do things like debating on the topic as a whole. You have lobbying time where you draft a resolution. Then you debate a resolution, you create amendments to make the resolution better, and you vote to pass, fail a resolution or an amendment. So then, let's go on to what impact MUN in and of itself has. Many educators have cited MUN as a tool to stimulate student enthusiasm, which in turn leads to independent thinkers. This is because rather than when you are reading from a, for example, 500 or 600 page book, when you are putting the skills that you learned or will learn into action by debating with other people and getting an experience of what real international relations oftentimes looks like, it really adds to enthusiasm because these students are getting firsthand action and are getting to do something. Additionally, rather than simple learning, deep learning is observed in students who participate in MUN simulations. This is exhibited through the discussions and thought processes participants undergo when participating in MUN conferences. For example, I remember myself being very enthusiastic about MUN because although I was very interested in politics and international relations before, by participating in MUN, I think I was able to really boost that level of enthusiasm and focus into something that I already liked. Because although previously it was simply about looking at news articles or looking at books that are 500 to 600 pages long, just filled with theories and case studies, I think putting that knowledge, putting that prior knowledge into action really helped me get interested into this field of politics and international relations. Also, in addition to strictly cognitive benefits, other benefits of knowledge are observed, especially in international relations knowledge. Additionally, an increase in the knowledge of multilateral issues and international issues is seen after participation in MUN, alongside the perceived international relations knowledge gap between experienced and inexperienced students decreasing with participation in the program. When one participates in MUN conferences and prepares for MUN conferences, because a topic is given to you, you are able to do in-depth research about that topic, looking not only at news articles, but also research papers or policy guidelines that governments and other agencies have produced. And by looking at this, you are not only able to get a glimpse of what this topic is about, but also what many countries are proposing and the state-of-the-art policies that certain countries are making in order to combat and tackle this issue. For example, I know that before participating in MUN, I knew a lot of theories about international relations and politics, and I knew a lot of case studies that were here and there, but I don't think I was able to garner knowledge to the depth at which I garnered knowledge when participating in these various MUN conferences. So then moving on, MUN also helps and educates people about SDGs. Now, these sustainable development goals are very important, and these are 17 goals that are very important that we have agreed that needs to be kept, and it's something that we have to do. A lot of people, shockingly, haven't even heard about the SDGs, and when asked about what the SDGs are, they oftentimes can't name even, for example, like 2 or 3 sustainable development goals. And because these sustainable development goals are needed to be fulfilled in order for a sustainable future that we all live in, it is very important that students know about these sustainable development goals. And by participating in MUN conferences, and especially MUN conferences that have a partnership with these sustainable development goals, students are able to learn what needs to be done in the future in order for a better society. Then the question is MUN all fair and equal? Well, the simple answer is that MUN isn't actually fair and equal, and MUN actually doesn't practice what it preaches. Within the Sustainable Development Goals, especially Sustainable Development Goal 10 is reducing inequalities, but MUN is notorious for creating inequalities of its own due to the massive cost and its reputation as a very elitist activity, and oftentimes it actually is. So as you can see in this graph that I organized, in this chart that I organized, this is the listing of the various costs that one will need in order to travel to National MUN or NMUN 2021. And we can see that the registration fee is very high at $200 per school, which is oftentimes split up between the students. And a delegate fee is $135 per person. And the hotel for even a couple days costs more than $1,000. And because of these various costs, we can see that participation in MUN conferences are very costly. And this is only a glimpse of the costs that we are looking at. In addition to all of these kinds of costs, there are also costs of meals, and also for as for to participate in an MUN conference, you oftentimes need a laptop computer because you will need to be writing resolutions and possibly even amendments on your laptop. And also, therefore, although affluent people can participate a lot, underprivileged portions of populations are inherently left out of these kind of great experiences. Although there has been a lot of movement in creating cheaper MUN conferences, it is oftentimes very costly to go to even these regional or small conferences. And also, these regional and small conferences oftentimes do not present delegates with the same kind of experience that massive and big conferences give. As such, MUN can oftentimes be a highly discriminatory activity for delegates due to the lack of experience underprivileged delegates receive, as they are unable to attend many conferences due to the extremely high cost. This leads to many delegates, especially underprivileged delegates, missing out opportunities when attending future conferences, as one main difference in experienced and inexperienced delegates comes from the past resolutions they have drafted in previous MUN conferences. So basically, experience is king. Therefore, due to the inherent nature of MUN conferences, delegates who have access to more resources are likely to have access to more opportunities to speak, both at the podium and when conversing with other delegates. This leads to a group of experienced delegates oftentimes dominating the conference and underprivileged and inexperienced delegates not being able to reap all the benefits that MUN conferences yield. Additionally, a major difference is seen between inexperienced privileged delegates and inexperienced underprivileged delegates. While inexperienced privileged delegates oftentimes have access to support from peers, upperclassmen, and faculty, inexperienced underprivileged delegates often do not have access to the sophisticated MUN programs the same way that experienced privileged delegates have. Therefore, in order to reduce inequalities even in MUN conferences, it's simply just that we don't want underprivileged portions of populations to be left out of such great experiences and opportunities. We want these people to learn the same things. We want underprivileged people to have the same kind of experiences and learn the same things that experienced delegates and privileged delegates will have. Therefore, an equal access and equal opportunity is very important and is paramount in importance. And also, it's kind of ironic that MUN emphasizes SDGs, especially equality, so much, but harbors so much inequality of its own. Therefore, there needs to be initiatives to solve this problem, because when we have a problem, we need to tackle it and we have to solve it. So, being a part of MUN Impact, I've observed what MUN Impact does and how it contributes to reducing inequalities in the field of MUN and educating people about MUN. My initiative and MUN Impact's initiative is similar in that we both want to combat inequality in MUN. However, MUN Impact does this by providing free education for students that are willing to participate in MUN, as well as host monthly or regular debates. My initiative cannot provide for more MUN conferences or anything of that kind, but it aims to enrich any MUN experiences that students may have now or in the future. And to achieve this, my solution is using artificial intelligence. So many of you probably have heard about artificial intelligence somewhere, right? So oftentimes you will see articles or hear from your friends or your family about deepfakes or AI talking to humans or AI playing Jeopardy, right? Like this, artificial intelligence is now becoming more and more pervasive in our lives. It's affecting every avenue of our lives, and in the future, it's going to affect more. Artificial intelligence, although hard to make, has great capacities in that it can handle so many more things that one human cannot do alone. However, unlike the intelligence displayed by humans, artificial intelligence aims to model the human thinking process and replicate it artificially through the use of machines. So because it is not feasible for someone to constantly help you or be on a hotline, so the usage of AI was deemed the best by me. So I had prior knowledge about coding and AI, so I thought that implementing AI or this piece of technology would be a natural fit for me and would be something that I would be apt to do. So now I would like to explain about the technology behind the program that I made, RNN and LSTM. So RNN basically stems from the idea that humans do not think of things like from the basic and from the start. When you are looking, when you are listening to this presentation and when you are looking at these kinds of slides, you are not constantly replenishing your mind with fresh new information, but you are building off of what you heard previously, the words you heard previously, building off of that knowledge and comprehending what I'm talking to you about right now. You do not think, when you hear something, you do not think that that is individual of every single other thing that you heard, but rather you draw many connections and you draw similarities. And that's how you comprehend new things, and that's how you understand things. The basic downsides of traditional neural networks before the discovery and creation of RNN was that it was not able to think in a way that continues from what you have previously learned. Therefore, the recurrent neural network, also abbreviated as RNN, is a model that aims to solve this problem. RNN constantly repeats itself and makes it so that the information you garnered from previous steps are now applied into what you learn right now and in the future. Like this, as shown in the image, where the arrow goes around the A, RNN constantly repeats itself. In this picture, RNN is basically one big chunk. So A is one big chunk of RNN, sorry. A basically gets an input text and gives out and outputs HT. The repeat sign around A means that at the next step of this network, the next step of this network gathers information from the previous step of this network. This kind of repeating structure of RNN can seem mystifying, but if you think about it, RNN is not very different from the traditional neural network, because RNN is like a network where you have one RNN and then you are copying and pasting it more and more. And basically, that means it looks like a chain like this. Basically, when it is talking about when it's constantly repeating itself, it means that simply there's one step and there's the next step, except that these steps are just simply copied from one another. Like this, the sequential factor of RNN means that it is very apt to deal with data types such as a sequence or a list, because it's one after another. And that's how it's actually being used. After its creation and after its inception, RNN has been used in fields like voice recognition and voice to text, and things like language modeling, translations, and creating automatic captions for images. And from all these areas, RNN has garnered much success. However, RNN does have inherent problems of its own. And that's why LSTM comes to LSTM is a very important factor in determining the RNN success. LSTM is a very specific type of RNN. It's a very special type of RNN. And it deals with the problems of long-term dependencies much better. Oftentimes, when we are trying to comprehend what we are learning about right now, or what we are hearing or looking about right now, we oftentimes might not need information that stretches too far back in the past. For example, when you are listening to this presentation and seeing this image and listening to my explanation, you might not want to pull information for example, maybe when you got stung by a bee when you were 5 years old, right? That information clearly has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. So we might not need to take information from something that happened so far back in the past. You might only need to take information from what happened very recently. And another example is predicting in a sentence what word will come next by looking at previous words. For example, if we say that there's a sentence, the clouds are in the sky, and we want to predict what the last word is going to be, we don't need to look at anything other than the sentence, the clouds are in the sky, because it will be very obvious that the last word, I guess, is sky. Like this, if there isn't too big of a difference between the information you need to pull from and the information you are working with right now, RNN is able to do its job very well. Now, this image that's shown here is an example of a short-term dependent RNN. In theory, RNN can handle these long-term dependencies very well, and for very simple cases, this is very effective. However, in reality, the problem is that RNN is not suitable for handling long-term dependencies, and that's when LSTM comes into place. LSTM is a very special type of RNN again, and it has the ability to handle long-term dependencies. First introduced by Hochreiter and Schmidt-Huber in 1997, RNN has constantly been developed with further research. LSTM has been constantly developed with further research and has solved many problems in various types of situations. And also, it is currently being used now in many situations, although the state-of-the-art technology has changed to transformers. For LSTM, in order to evade problems with long-term dependencies, it is explicitly modeled. And it's simply that remembering certain things for a long time should be the basic behavior of a model. The model shouldn't be learning towards that. And therefore, all RNNs have a chain-like system where a neural network module, as shown before, is constantly repeated. And in the RNN, this simple network module in a network has a very simple structure. And one example can be the TAN-H layer, or the yellow layer that is seen in the middle module. LSTM has a similar structure. LSTM has a similar chain-like structure, but every repeated module has a different structure. So rather than a very simple neural network layer with only one layer, there are 4 network layers that give and take information from each other. The key part to LSTM is the cell state. The cell state is basically, in this module, the black line and arrow that is seen. The cell state can be compared to a conveyor belt. So there is very small linear interaction, and the chain reaction of these layers keeps on going. The information, it is very apt to do things like just information consistently moving linearly without it changing. The LSTM has the ability to add certain things to the cell state, and these are controlled by things called gates. And gates are additional ways that information can be processed and delivered, and is created by a multiplication between the sigmoid layer and the point, and it is created by a sigmoid layer and a pointwise multiplication. So this is one of the first gates of RNN, of LSTM. So the sigmoid layer releases a value between 0 and 1, and these values represent how much information should be delivered. Then we look at the first step of the LSTM, which is basically you decide what to forget, and the sigmoid layer decides what kind of information should be forgotten. So therefore, the gate here is named the forget gate layer. In this phase, the HT1 and XT is the input, and give CT1 a value between 0 and 1. If the value is 1, it basically means that all information should be kept. If the value is 0, all information should be just thrown away. The next step is from the information that is received, what kind of information will be stored in the cell state. The input gate layer, a sigmoid layer, decides which values to update, and then the tanh layer makes a vector of candidate values called CT and prepares to add it to the cell state. And then now you update the previous state CT1 and creates CT-1 and creates a new cell state CT. And because in the previous process you decided which values to update, you just have to implement this. And then lastly, what needs to be done is that you basically have to decide which values you need to output. Sorry, this is the correct image. Lastly, you have to decide which values to output. Now for this output, the cell state, this output will be a filtered value that is based on the cell state. First, in the sigmoid layer, you put the input value in the sigmoid layer and decides which part of the cell state will be sent to the output. Then for the cell state is now on the tanh layer, and it receives the value between -1 and 1 and multiplies it to the sigmoid gate. And therefore, we get only the values that we want to output. Now this is an example of a model that is changed from the LSTM quite a bit. So what I've explained until now, it was a very basic type of LSTM, and LSTM has been changed and adapted in order to fit various purposes. So what's being shown here is called a p-pole connection, introduced by Jers and Schmidt-Huber in 2000. Another example is a gated recurrent unit introduced by Cho et al. In 2014. And also, this is an example of a depth-gated RNN. These are all examples of how LSTM has been adapted and has been developed to different purposes. So now comes the explanation of my program and the implementation. So first of all, I had to collect a very large data set. I was able to gather around 200 MUN resolutions, pulling around 80 to 90 resolutions from what I wrote, and pulling the others from contributions that range from people I knew to certain MUN conferences volunteering to send me their resolutions. And although 200 resolutions is actually not a lot in order to train an AI, because oftentimes training an AI requires like tens of thousands or like millions of data sets. Because MUN resolutions are in nature very specialized documents and are very hard to find, I had to just work with 200. And so going on to the explanation of this program, to solve the issues of MUN that I previously mentioned, an AI resolution writer or helper was created so that students could be provided with suggestions on possible options for their resolutions. And it was hypothesized that as the AI program automatically recommends what to write based on the previous text the student has written. The program makes use of a recurrent neural network in order to solve the problems of simple processing. Simple processing does not make use of previous information, but an RNN, a self-repeating process, makes use of knowledge garnered from previous steps. And with this, I was able to create a program in which when you type in a certain part of a resolution that you are writing, it automatically recommends to you what you would have to write next. Although it doesn't give you one option, it gives you quite a bit of options. You can choose and pick and also research more about those options in order to choose. However, it should be noted that it is not a program that will write the whole resolution for you, because you have to put in a lot of effort on your own. It's just a helping guide along your way in order to ensure that your resolution has better quality and that you are learning about all these different things while you're writing the resolution. And for the research methodology, first, after the program was developed, first, a random set of 100 students who have participated in at least one MUN conference, all of different backgrounds and ethnicities, were selected. These students were surveyed for the number of MUN conferences they attended and their economic background. Their exact economic background was not gathered, but rather from a range. Then students were instructed to write an MUN resolution on a randomly selected topic that was kept the same for all students. Furthermore, the students were again instructed to write a resolution on a different topic, but in addition to using any additional resources possible, also utilizing the MUN AI resolution writer. Lastly, all resolutions were graded on a scale of 1 to 10 by 5 randomly selected, highly experienced graders. Now, the results showed that after the resolutions were graded, the results were compiled and averaged. For the resolutions before the usage of the MUN AI resolution writer, the average mark was 5.68 out of 10. On the other hand, after using the AI resolution writer, the average mark was 7.43 out of 10. Looking more closely at the results, it was found that the average difference for delegates from relatively low-income households and inexperienced delegates was greater than the average difference for delegates from relatively high-income and experienced delegates. So then I concluded that although MUN has many inherent problems, it is without doubt that it is an enriching activity that benefits students from all income brackets. However, to maximize the difference in the benefits garnered between participants of different income brackets, while also at the same time maximizing the net benefit gained from MUN, it was found that the use of an AI resolution writer could potentially help fulfill this goal due to an overall positive increase in resolution quality, with the MUN AI resolution writer further benefiting students of lower income brackets. However, there are current limitations, and here are my solutions to resolve these limitations. So one big limitation is data. So in order to In order to better an AI program, oftentimes two things are cited in order to make it better. First is data, and second is using a new or different technology. So although I did tell you that I have garnered around 200 resolutions and have used this to train the AI, it was 200 is actually a very small number to train an AI with, and therefore the AI wasn't trained successfully, and oftentimes for the results, when a certain part of a resolution was entered, it was found that there were a lot of errors, and the MUN AI writer suddenly just repeated the same set of words over and over again, which is clearly a major problem. So therefore, much more data is needed in order to train this AI. This might be hard to do as MUN resolutions are specialized documents, but I think that this can be solved to a certain degree with web crawling. So by creating a crawling tool in order to gather text generated by humans, well, essentially text that humans wrote online, first gathering text that human wrote that are online in order to create a naturalized process of writing, and then implementing certain parameters and making it learn making it learn from a data set of MUN resolutions and UN resolutions. I think that a better result can be achieved. Another limitation is technology. Another part of this is technology. So RNN, LSTM, and GRU are all great pieces of technology that I used, but it was used because it was very accessible, it was cheap, it was relatively very cheap to use compared to state-of-the-art solutions such as GPT-3, and also because state-of-the-art technology such as GPT-3, it's very hard to implement, especially as a student, because it requires a high proficiency level of coding. Therefore, with more research and more studying into the field of AI and writing program for state-of-the-art solutions such as GPT-3 and implementing these state-of-the-art models, I think I will be able to better create a model. And this also brings to the attention of transformers. So transformers is a technology that was introduced in 2017. And while RNN and LSTM is a linearized model where you have to put in the first part of the information and a latter part of the information will come out, what happens with transformers is that you can input any part of, for example, a sentence or a text, and then it can generate, based on that, what comes before and after. So then the future implications of my initiative. So by bringing technology and MUN together, I envision a future of equality in MUN. Now, I am not saying that my solution can solve every single inherent problem that MUN has with inequalities, but I'm merely saying that inequalities can now be reduced, and whether students come from an affluent background or a not so affluent background, students will be able to have a similar or possibly even the same level of experience the same level of sophistication in many MUN conferences. Thank you. And if there are any questions, I think this is now the time for you to ask them.
Thanks for your presentation, Sean. Who do you want to entertain the questions? Will you be selecting them, or should an admin member should select them?
Any way is fine, but since I cannot see who wanted to ask questions right now, will there be a way for me to see who would like to ask questions?
Yes, you can click on chat, but I don't see any questions right now. So if there's anyone who wants to unmute themselves, they can write on the chat and we will. Okay, we have a question from Mirin saying, is RRN in the coding?
Yeah, so I think I saw, okay, is it in the coding or the microprocessor? So RNN is basically, so I also saw a similar question up there talking about, a similar question from you talking about is RNN the microcontroller like Arduino or Raspberry Pi? But RNN is basically, it's a, I think you can think of it as a module. It's kind of like a formula, or not really a formula, but it's a way of doing things. And it's a way of replicating how humans think and how humans process information. But because obviously machines don't have a functioning brain, you are trying to model the process that humans think, but simply with programming and with code. Does that answer your question? It's not like a structure that is built into the microprocessor. And also you talked about Raspberry Pi, but I think that, I don't know if this will be implementable in Raspberry Pi, because when I was running, when I was trying to, when I was doing like, when I was making the AI learn from my data set, although I do have like a relatively good computer, it did take a long time and it was a pretty hefty process. So I don't know if a simple computer like Raspberry Pi would be able to handle this kind of complex situation. Are there any further questions? Oh, so there's a question from Anush. Are you pursuing CS now? I am currently not an undergraduate student or a graduate student. I'm actually a high school student, in South Korea. So although, because I am in high school, I am not pursuing a certain major. In the future, I am looking forward to getting a dual degree in political science and computer science. Well, I hope to. And also there was a question by Hanuk about how does your program specifically reduce inequalities? So as I mentioned previously, this has much to do with the preparation process. So inexperienced delegates do not have access to many materials, because even though there's Google and we can search up many things, it simply is that it's very hard to find these resources. And when experienced or privileged delegates have wide access to these resources, because oftentimes within like the school MUN club, a lot of previous resolutions or documents are shared between one another. I guess it just boils down to these more privileged delegates and these more privileged students are able to prepare for these MUN conferences to a greater degree, compared to these underprivileged delegates who might not at their school even have an MUN club, or even if they have an MUN club, these people might not have an MUN advisor that is knowledgeable in MUN and can help them with this process. And therefore, in order to help them do this kind of research, this MUN AI resolution writer and helper aims to help delegates within the process of writing resolutions, and by being more prepared, as I've explained before, because being more prepared leads to better performance in MUN in the actual conference. you are, first of all, prepared better, and second of all, at the actual MUN conference, you probably can speak about these topics more confidently, and a lot of people will have a very good first impression about you, therefore allowing you to converse with other delegates about these topics and kind of equally and like leveling out the playing field. Are there any further questions? Okay, so there was a question about from Marion about, do you have social media? Yes, I do. Um, Here, let me quickly write it and share it for you. So yes, this is my social media. This is my Instagram account. Um, Sean_Kim22. If anyone has any further questions after this presentation ends, or would like to talk to me about this initiative, please feel free to leave me a DM through this account, and please feel free to friend me.
Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. So I would advise everyone to visit the links I've just shared. And we also have a social hour starting in 5 minutes. Thank you for coming and thank you for presenting. Hopefully see you on day 2 and 3 as well.
Yes, thank you everyone for listening to my presentation. I hope you all had a good time, and I hope you're also inspired to do things in the future that will reduce inequalities, like the thing I'm doing right now. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sean, for your very interesting and fascinating presentation. I'm sure that the participants enjoyed it as much as I have. That being said, participants, this concludes this session. You are dismissed. As Daphne said, if you have signed up for the social hour, please head on over there. And once again, thank you for attending this session.